My real-life situation is listening to National Public Radio, also known as NPR, and hearing the daily rundown of international events, most of which seem to revolve around violence, especially of the international variety. This led me to think of specific examples of violence, such as the persecution that caused the Syrian refugee crisis, or instances of cartel violence and terrorism, or even police brutality, or other occasions of similar merit. At this point, I began to wonder if, as a fellow human, I should be taking action to help those who are affected by these acts of violence and others like them. But then I also wondered that if I were to help out, would it be out of empathy and because I really cared and wanted to help out and change something about the issue, or would it be because I felt obligated or for some sort of personal gain, and so that I would no longer feel guilty about the situation that was at hand? I even wondered that if I was to help for personal gain, would it be a bad thing? Because if I was helping for personal gain, I would, after all, still be helping. And wouldn't that be better than not helping at all, or just sitting there and letting it happen? And this led me to my question: what vested interest should the global community take in our apathetic nature towards violence? First, one must look at this question: do we have a responsibility to solve the violence that we see in the world around us? And when we respond in what might be considered an emotional manner, then one might say yes, because when responding using emotion, we feel that it's our humanitarian duty, or that it's the right thing to do. And so we begin to take what's called an altruistic approach. See, using the approach of altruism is the belief or practice of disinterested and selfless concern for the well-being of others. Basically, you do something because it's right. And one might even argue that using this approach is how such groups like the UN security troops or movements like Black Lives Matter were created. It happens when people feel bad or think that the proper response is to take action. On the opposite end of the spectrum are those who feel that unless they have a self-interest in the issue, they don't need to act at all. And this is a more apathetic approach. Apathy is when one isn't showing feeling or interest or enthusiasm or concern, kind of meaning that you don't really care about a particular thing or situation. And this could be considered more of a logical approach. See, those using this train of thought might reason that because the issue doesn't affect them immediately or personally, it's not their problem, and as such, they have no reason to intervene. And this would pose the question: in certain situations, should instinct override reason? Another aspect that one has to consider when looking at our approach to reacting to violence is how we perceive the issue. Many people perceive one or two violent acts as shocking and feel the need to react to them. But what if the violence was constant, thus desensitizing you to the issue? To make this concept more clear, I'll give an example. In the city of Chicago, in Illinois, there's a large gang presence, and as a result, there are often warring gangs, so people stuck in these neighborhoods get caught in the crossfire. And the violence that these gangs cause has become so common, people refer to the city as Chirac. It's almost like a spin-off of Iraq, because of the constant war that's happening. However, what's more interesting is the fact that the citizens don't respond in a frantic manner to the gunshots or the bodies that they find near them. Instead, they avoid the areas they know are problematic or even nickname them, or resort to the violence themselves. And this would lead one to believe that after hearing the sound of gunshots repeatedly and seeing ambulances drive up and down the streets constantly, you would tune it out. You almost become numb to it in a sense. And while people might find this shocking, when you look at it, it actually doesn't seem that strange. See, look at it like this. If violence was a part of your everyday routine, sort of similar to brushing your teeth or taking a shower, then the need to react might not be as strong. And another angle one might use when looking at those who don't react to violence would be, is it worth it? If you react to the violence in a situation such as gang violence or a shootout, what would it cost you? It might be a simple graze by a bullet, or it could be your life. And this again brings the altruistic versus apathetic argument and poses a larger question. Does becoming numb to violence create an acceptable excuse to the apathy towards it? Additionally, when assessing how much of interest people take in violence is how it's presented to them. Most of the violent occurrences we see are reported by a news outlet. And while that does have the benefit of allowing people to become more aware of the world around them, it may also be a contributing factor to the lack of reaction. When one watches, reads, or listens to the news, it becomes sort of somber and depressing, and you see only these kind of events that are filling the airways. And the Big Think reported that 90% of the news we hear is negative. A study done by psychologists and reported by BBC found that the world is not just full of bad things, and journalists aren't just cynical people looking for a terrible story. But instead, the study suggested that because people are trained to assess words like bomb, war, or cancer more quickly than words that are happy like smile and fun and baby, then the more pertinent words would be processed and noticed because we as a society want to know if we're being threatened. It is also worth exploring the manner in which an incident, violent or nonviolent, is presented to the audience. Usually it's not just stated and left there for the audience to interpret on their own, but rather presented, then analyzed by the presenter, and possibly several other sources who may have varying viewpoints, ideas, and conclusions. To add even more confusion, the story might be presented by several news outlets, and each outlet may approach it with a different angle and viewpoint, and while this is nice, in many instances it can also be overwhelming and redundant, maybe even causing viewers to lose interest or become less concerned about the topic. On the other end of the spectrum are those incidents which are presented as the end-all be-all and cause almost mass hysteria of some sort. Now, there are those cases in which the presented information is somewhere in the middle, and instances like these cause people to react. Take, for example, the recent reporting of police brutality. These reports fall somewhere in the middle. However, the topic itself generally causes people to react with protest or disdain for brutality. But in some instances, those reactions are violent. And this would lend itself to the question, what role does media have in creating a reaction to violence or in creating the violent actions themselves? Another facet which one must address when investigating violence and the reaction we have to it as a society is how long has the violence been happening, and has our reaction to it changed throughout time? See, through time there have been countless acts of violence, from massacres to revolutions to genocide to bombings and everything in between. But it's not till the latter portions of history that it seems to have an impact on society in the most drastic manner. So it's not that violence is a new phenomenon, nor is there a response to it. But why is there such a difference between it in the past and it in the present? One answer might be that the advances of the human race. See, if 200 years ago a war were to break out, or a massacre were to happen, there would be people that would report it and to spread the news. However, the news that was spread would take far more time because it was less advanced than today. It would be reported, and then the paper would have to be created, and then it would have to be mailed and delivered, and finally it would be read. And all of this might take up to 2 weeks. And by the time it was, to the people, there wouldn't be much they could do about it to change the situation or make much of an impact. In contrast, if a massacre were to take place today, it might only take hours to get the news, report it to the news stations, and have it up and running on every news app imaginable, thus allowing people to read the news as it came and react instantly, even when the news may come from halfway across the globe. This in turn not only creates a more highly aware society, but also a climate where the reaction can be almost instantaneous. So it may not necessarily be that violence has increased and reactions have decreased, but rather things happen on a more expedited timeline, and that it's just harder to read so many reports of violence as it's coming rapid fire. And this would lead one to ask the question, how has the advancement of media and the human race itself affected our reaction to violence? And this would bring us back to the original question, which was, what, if any, vested interest would the global community have in the violence that happens around them? And because we're able to see it at a moment's notice and gain countless perspectives, we think that it would change. However, this might work against people reacting to violence because it creates a constant berating and never-ending feeling that there is nothing one can do to stop the violence. Also, if people are constantly seeing an issue or hearing about it, they may develop an immunity or a numbness to it and feel that it's just a natural part of life. There's also the perspective that it may not be your job to stop violence when it doesn't affect us directly or is in our path. Or those who say that if we as a human race don't stop the violence, then the cycle will continue. So, in attempting to answer this question, I found that there's many facets of it, and actually, I didn't find a comprehensive answer, but rather a bigger question. Is it possible that our apathetic nature towards violence is not because we don't care, but rather because we as a human race have not found a way to both altruistically and effectively respond to violence without creating more negative effects than positive ones?